Have you ever picked up an annual sustainability report, maybe skimmed through all the colorful infographics and bold net zero pledges and wondered, does any of this actually mean anything? Hi there. I'm Mallory, a business student majoring in accounting at the University of Alberta. And for my certificate in Sustainability Integrative Project, I've spent the last several months digging into exactly this question. Today's episode is called Evaluating ESG Reporting. Do disclosures lead to real sustainability? You may have heard of ESG reporting before, but to give those who haven't a refresher, ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. It's the framework that companies around the world use to report on things like their carbon emissions, labor practices, and boardroom diversity. Over the last decade, ESG reporting has exploded. Billions of dollars of investment decisions are now based on these disclosures. But there's a tension at the heart of all of this. Just because a company is reporting more doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing more. And that gap between the story on the page and the reality on the ground is what this episode is all about. Before I dive in, I want to anchor everything in a definition that I encountered in my very first lecture on sustainability here at the U of A. It comes from the United Nations Brundtland Commission, and it defines sustainable development as, quote, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This phrase has really stuck with me, and I think it's the right lens through which to evaluate ESG reporting. Not does this look good on paper, but does this actually protect the future? So let's start at the beginning. What is ESG reporting and why did it become such a big deal? At its core, ESG reporting is a way for companies to communicate their sustainability performance to the outside world. I'm talking about investors, regulators, customers, and the broader public. The idea is rooted in transparency and accountability. If you can measure it, disclose it, and verify it, then stakeholders can hold you responsible for it. Researchers like Raghaven, writing in 2022, have noted that ESG reporting is designed to improve trust between companies and their stakeholders, and to encourage the kind of ethical business practices that have real positive impacts on society and the environment. Another study done by Aziz and Alshdaifat, published in 2024, takes this further, arguing that ESG reporting can foster stakeholder engagement, drive corporate accountability, and theoretically, improve environmental, financial, and societal outcomes all at once. So the logic makes sense, right? Disclose your emissions, disclose your governance practices, and let the market reward companies that are doing well and penalize those that aren't. ESG reporting then becomes a lever for change. For a while, it looked like it was really working. More companies were reporting, reports were getting longer, more detailed, more structured. Third-party frameworks like the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, also known as TCFD, became industry standards. But then the data started to tell a more complicated story. Let me walk you through 3 key studies that shaped how I think about this issue. The first is by Arvidsson and Dumais, which was published in 2021. They looked at a large sample of Swedish publicly listed firms over a multi-year period, tracking both the quality of their ESG reporting and the actual ESG performance. What they found was striking. Reporting quality steadily increased year over year. Companies were getting better at disclosing information. It was more comprehensive, more structured. But here's the catch. Actual ESG performance, the real-world outcomes, plateaued around 2015. It stopped improving even as the reports kept getting better. Arvidsson and Dumais call this a decoupling. A decoupling is a separation between the process of reporting and the substance of what's being reported on. The second study I want to highlight is by Darnall, G. Iwata, and Arimura from 2022. They looked at how ESG reporting guidelines and verification methods affect the quality of corporate disclosures. They found that companies using content-focused verification, meaning an external auditor actually checks the substance of what's being reported, disclose significantly more sustainability information than companies using process-focused verification, which only checks that a reporting process was followed. Now, here's what's important. Most of the major global ESG standards, including the most widely adopted ones, emphasize process-focused verification, which, according to the research, is the less effective approach. So we've built a global system on a foundation that may not be as rigorous as we need it to be. The third study is by Aziz and Alshdaifat from 2024. They surveyed the broader ESG reporting landscape and identified a third major problem: inconsistency. Different companies use different frameworks. Different industries define materiality differently. There's no universal standard for what has to be disclosed or how it's measured. This means that when an investor or researcher, or even just a curious person like me or you, tries to compare two companies' ESG performance, they're often comparing apples to oranges. The data can't be trusted at face value, and that undermines the entire premise of ESG reporting as a tool for accountability. When you put all of this together, what emerges is the concept that a lot of people in sustainability circles are talking about at the moment: greenwashing. In this case, greenwashing would be when a company presents itself as more environmentally responsible than it actually is. And while not every ESG report is greenwashing, the structural weaknesses that we just talked about, the decoupling between reporting and performance, the weak verification standards, and the inconsistent frameworks create conditions that make greenwashing easy to do and hard to detect. Think about what this means in practice. Let's say a company invests heavily in producing a beautiful, detailed, well-structured ESG report. It would score highly on third-party ESG ratings. Institutional investors would pour capital into it based on these ratings. The company looks sustainable, but emissions haven't actually come down. Water usage hasn't actually improved. The supply chain still has serious human rights issues that just aren't being tracked carefully. This isn't a theoretical concern. There have been real high-profile cases of companies with strong ESG ratings that were later found to have significant environmental or social violations. And every time that happens, it erodes public trust, not just in that company, but in the entire ESG system. I want to be clear. I'm not arguing that ESG reporting is worthless. Far from it. The research does show real benefits. Transparency has improved. Stakeholder engagement has grown. Some companies have genuinely changed their practices because of reporting obligations. ESG reporting has moved sustainability from a niche concern to a boardroom priority. What I am arguing is that we need to be more honest about its limitations, and we need to think seriously about how to bridge the gap between what companies say and what they do. So what can be done? Based on the research I've reviewed, I see a few promising directions. Let me outline 4 of them. First, mandatory and standardized reporting. One of the biggest problems right now is that ESG reporting is largely voluntary in most jurisdictions, and where it is required, the standards vary widely. The EU has moved towards mandatory sustainability reporting under its Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, also known as CSRD, which is one of the most comprehensive frameworks in the world. Canada and other countries are watching closely. Standardization won't solve everything, but it does create a common baseline. Second, stronger verification. As the Donal et al. Research suggests, content-focused verification, where auditors actually check outcomes, not processes, leads to more robust disclosure. Shifting towards this model and requiring independent third-party verification as a norm rather than an exception would strengthen the credibility of ESG data considerably. Third, outcome-based metrics. Right now, a lot of ESG reporting focuses on inputs and processes. We have a sustainability policy, we conducted a materiality assessment, we have a target to reach net zero by 2050. What we need more of is outputs. Here's how our emissions actually changed this year. Here's the measurable improvement in water quality near our facilities. Tying reporting to real-world outcomes makes it much harder to dress up the numbers. And fourth, technology. Emerging tools, satellite monitoring, AI-powered supply chain audits, blockchain-based data tracking have this potential to independently verify corporate claims in ways that weren't possible even 5 years ago. If these tools became integrated into the reporting system, they could dramatically reduce the gap between disclosure and reality. I want to close with a reflection that connects this back to why I chose this topic in the first place. I'm studying accounting, and accounting is fundamentally about measurement, about creating reliable records of what is true so that decisions can be well informed. The Brundtland definition of sustainability asks us to protect the future, and I believe that accounting, done well, can be a tool for that protection. But accounting can also be manipulated. Numbers can be selected, framed, and presented in ways that tell a story that isn't quite true. And what I've found in researching ESG reporting is that the same risks apply. When we build a reporting system without significant rigor, verification, and standardization, we create space for numbers to lie. What gives me hope, though, is that the field is not standing still. Researchers like Arvidsson, Dumais, Denal, and others are asking exactly the right questions. Regulators are beginning to respond. And there's a growing recognition among investors, executives, and students like us that the planet doesn't have time for reports that look good but don't mean anything. The Brundtland Commission has asked us to meet our needs without compromising the future. ESG reporting at its best is a tool for doing exactly that, but only if we hold it to the standard that it promises. Thank you so much for listening. This podcast was produced as a part of my Certificate in Sustainability Integrative Project at the University of Alberta. If you'd like to read the research I referenced today, I'll include the full citations in the show notes below. There's also a tidbit about the certificate itself if you'd like to check it out. Thanks again. Have a great day.